Well, hello folks. After 18 months away from YouTube, I've finally uploaded another video. It may seem as if I had become the world's worst YouTuber, and I could think that even I was beginning to believe the same thing. But that 18 months of absence doesn't go without its reasons. Reason number one, about 1 year ago, I finally landed my dream job. And after 4 years of being an underpaid flight instructor, after 9 years of being an underappreciated first officer and also a captain in the regional airlines, I landed a job flying my dream airplane, a 747, around the world. I was hired in April. I started in early June. Now, every pilot goes through a 2-month, about 1.5 to 2 month period, doing what's called initial type training if they've never flown that airplane before. Even if they're flying with a new company and they have experience on that type of airplane, they still have to go through this ground and simulator training portion. Now, after that 1.5 to 2 months, I waited for my initial operating experience, where I spent a lot of time still studying for about 2 months and 3 weeks. The airlines are really backed up in their training departments because, number one, they were getting everybody back from not flying for a long time after COVID. And also the airlines are hiring like gangbusters right now. So I spent about 2 months and 3 weeks waiting for my initial operating experience, which is IOE. IOE is where you actually go out with a highly rated captain, and he actually shows you how to actually fly the airplane and survive in the environment that you're going to be operating in. So for my initial operating experience, it began in October. I would say that I was on it for about another 1.5 or 1 3/4 months, where I flew around the world, places like Hong Kong, Honolulu, Leipzig, Brussels, and I had an amazing time. The 747 has always been my dream airplane. As a kid, I bought all these models of fighter jets and military aircraft and built those, but I only built one airliner, and that airliner was a 747. So with a father who had been in the 4th Armored Division, he was deployed to Germany in the 1960s, where he met my mom, a German national. I was always crossing the pond as a passenger, and most often than not, it was a 747. Maybe some 707s earlier on, but those are nowhere to be found anymore, really. But the second and bigger reason why I haven't uploaded a video in 18 months is, number one, I was collecting equipment to actually bring you a better presentation. I hope you like the picture and the sound a lot better than my previous videos. If you guys caught my last video about the spray finish for the interior of cars, those 700 or 800 viewers may have seen that I sold the X6. That's right. After months and months of what the f moments with the X6, the cost-benefit analysis for me was such a grenade-like car was to sell it. So I sold the X6 and I bought another car, and I've been essentially test driving it for the last 18 months. So let's go on over and take a look at what I bought. Well, being mechanically inclined as I am, I was actually able to keep the X6 in really good shape and in perfect running order for the buyer. But that being said, when I did go back into the finance office at my local BMW dealership, they quoted me $6,000 for an additional 3 years of powertrain coverage only. So in the end, my cost-benefit analysis just told me that the car had to go. I was happy to sell it in perfectly good running order and in very good shape to the new buyers. I do wish them good luck with the X6. But I did set out on a search for what would be the best, the ultimate German used car about 6 months before I sold the X6. And that search began with this ridiculous search term. And that search term was reliable German muscle cars. Yeah, I know, pathetic, isn't it? But I got some results, and more often than not, it wasn't necessarily a car that I got a good hit on. It was actually an engine. And the engine that kept popping up was the M278 V8 twin turbo, 4.7 liters. And that manifested itself in a 402 to 449 horsepower output, depending upon the applications. So when I did keep on getting M278, I would throw that into the Wikipedia search engine, click on go, and it would pop up a number of applications. So what were some of the applications? Some of the applications were the GL, the ML, the SL, which not quite that old yet, the S-Class Mercedes, and a number of cars that I was kind of pass on. Having driven a German SUV that was US built, I wasn't too keen on buying another US built German car. I wanted my search to always begin with cars that had a W in the VIN number, and that's the beginning VIN number. So what's the significance of a W in the beginning of the VIN number? That means that the car was actually built in Germany. And from what my research yields, it seems to me that if there's an S in the nomenclature of the car, it was built in Germany. So your SLs, your S's, your CLS's, and for those people who are pretty good with identifying cars based off of the silhouette alone, this is what I got. Yeah, I know. I really have to work on my skip edit. Here it is. It's a 2014 CLS 550, and I got it with 36,000 miles on it 18 months ago, and I have been on a 18-month test drive that has taken me from South Florida to the Detroit, Michigan area for training and back, and lots of daily driving with this car up to 53,000 miles. And that said, this car has been a joy to drive. I have put this much money into repairs on this car. Now, when I first bought this car, it was from a private owner who had 3 other cars in his stable, so he was able to keep it relatively low mileage. But if you are going to buy from a private seller, and especially with lower mileage, the Mercedes-Benz dealer that they said that they have been getting it maintained at will not be too quick to release the records of maintenance to you without a sign-off from the owner. So make sure you get a sign-off from the owner so that they will release the maintenance records to you. Now, I did that, and the owner was happy to oblige. One thing that I did discover on the maintenance is that the tires were pretty much the original tires from 2014, and I was buying the car in 2022. So I did reshod the entire car with new tires, and we're going to talk about tires in a little while when we talk about some of the data and the drive experience. That being said, you might say, well, okay, well, you know, you're a 747 pilot, and surely you're making enough money to buy something newer or maybe an AMG. All right, well, let's address those arguments one at a time. The AMG question. Well, if you follow the hashtag on Instagram, CLS63AMG, it just takes a couple of video snippets to know that people who buy AMG cars generally buy them so that they can race them. Now, you can race a car and keep it in really nice, high quality and very well maintained condition, but some people don't. And I wasn't willing to take that chance of buying an AMG vehicle that may have been neglected. Of course, every good seller is going to say that they took really good care of it, but that's kind of a door that I didn't want to go through, and I don't necessarily recommend you go through unless you've really known the owner well and know the previous history of the car really, really well. Now, let's address, well, you must be making enough money to buy a new one. Well, as we saw from the N63 by BMW, German car manufacturers these days, unlike the 70s and 80s, are not above beta testing their cars on the general public. Clearly, had BMW simply done some endurance and longevity tests on their N63, this problem of the premature valve guide wear would have made itself known. Well, I guess that makes you wonder, did they know about it and release the engine first? Only those people involved in the class action lawsuit and the actual litigation would probably know that answer. But I wanted an engine that had been thoroughly gone through. The teething process was over, something that airplanes even have to go through, as we saw with the 787's lithium battery fires. Well, the early versions of the M278 engine did have some problems. We'll discuss those in the details section of this video. And this engine, or excuse me, this car also comes with the Mercedes-Benz 7G-tronic transmission. A fine transmission by all stretches of the imagination, but it too, with the CLS, we've dodged a bullet. We'll go over that data point here a little bit later. So, in the spirit of relaunching my channel, I also have a new intro, and here's the new intro.
Awesome climb. You're up.
Hi, I'm Stefan, a 747 pilot here in the USA. With this channel, I'll be applying my technical knowledge to another passion of mine, automotives and the culture that surrounds it. For the next few minutes,
30,
sit down,
20,
settle in,
10,
and hang on. Our next stop is Cleveland Aeromotive. Most automotive journalists call the introduction of the C218 CLS in model year 2006 as a four-door coupe as having created a new market segment, but I wholeheartedly disagree. From 1974 to 1990, Aston Martin explored the four-door coupe body style with their Lagonda. Naturally, with an entry price starting at today's equivalent of $360,000, access to all but the most fortunate was prohibited. At the time, the design was such a flop and sales so low that other automakers didn't even venture an affordable alternative to it. The W218 chassis, as Mercedes-Benz refers to it, was in production from model years 2012 to 2018. My 2014 is a second-gen pre-facelift CLS. The W218 CLS chassis is based off of what's come to be known as a very robust and rather trouble-free W212 E-Class chassis. Now, let's explore some other points of interest. The M278 in the CLS 550 application has a factory rating of 402 horsepower and 443 pounds-feet of torque. High-output 449 horsepower versions are found in the heavier S and GL class models. Although the power plant would eventually earn an almost bulletproof reputation, I'd mentioned earlier some teething issues experienced early on with the M278. Earlier copies suffered from weak timing chain tensioners and oil check valve issues. This will be made evident from rattling coming from the serpentine area of the engine. If neglected, eventually your timing chain will jump sprockets, throwing your entire upper head assembly into a state of chaos, leading to widespread engine damage. This is why I focused my search on model years 2014 and later. Unlike BMW, Mercedes-Benz doesn't add letters and numbers to each subsequent update in its power plants. Addressing of these issues seems, however, to have occurred at Daimler's first technical update, marked by serial number only. Going their own on transmissions as Mercedes historically has, the in-house 7G-tronic is paired to the M278 engine. A search of common issues shows control module complications arising from virtually every 7G-tronic transmission installed, except on the CLS 550 itself. Now, I'm not aware of if it's a different part number or an entirely different design, but needless to say, we've dodged what could have been an expensive issue with this submodel of CLS, the 550. Adding to a number of firsts, the 7G-tronic was the first 7-speed automatic transmission used on a passenger vehicle. Everybody loves an air ride suspension. Until it breaks. With the exception of the CLS 400 and the CLS 63S AMG, every W218 sold in the United States was sold with a Mercedes-Benz Airmatic suspension as standard. Introduced in 1999, the system didn't come without its teething issues either. Premature leaking of the airbags, especially on the prolific E-Class W211, gave the Airmatic a particularly bad rap. That said, in an unofficial poll taken in the W218 owners' Facebook group, drivers, including myself, more often than not reported good experiences with higher mileage and slowly aging Airmatic systems. Either way, it's a good idea to keep some room on your credit card or better a small stash of cash on hand. Full replacement of airbags in all four corners and the compressor can set you back $2,500 to $3,500 if done by a dealership. If you simply get fed up with the Airmatic system, some owners reported converting their Airmatics over to the CLS 400's coilovers. Given that this is a 2014 and nearly 9 years old, admittedly the tech is starting to age. The screen by today's standards is a little bit small, and no, infotainment doesn't include Apple CarPlay or Android Auto, although I'm perfectly happy plugging my iPhone into the Hi-Fi with an aux cable for music and using the onboard Bluetooth for phone calls. If you absolutely must have the aforementioned, retrofit kits can be adapted to the existing infotainment head. Link in the description below. It's not a touchscreen, and thank God. I'm happy not having to clean finger smudges off of it every week. I like my dial mouse, thank you. Since we're on the topic of the infotainment head, even by 2023 standards, the backup camera resolution is very good. That being said, if you're backing up into the sun, the screen just about turns black until the camera lens falls into a shaded area. This could be dangerous as, unless your head is on a swivel, you could wind up inadvertently backing over objects or even pets and people.
What we're backing into.
Ironically, while getting video to demonstrate this very phenomena, it happened.
Into the sun. Oh, see?
Yes.
Yep. Here we go.
Okay, regarding the stereo, this is an area I find most YouTubers neglect or just plain skip over. Not sure if it came as standard on my CLS 550 or not, but my copy has the Harman and Kardon stereo. After a 6-video long struggle I captured upgrading my BMW X6's bass hi-fi to an acceptable level, I'm actually very pleased with this hi-fi. It comes with 12 speakers, including a coil-type subwoofer under the rear deck panel. I had a 12-inch JL audio sub in my BMW X6, but this coil-type sub in my CLS provides enough bass to keep me pretty happy. Alright, finally let's touch on design. I think that this is the most beautiful generation of CLS yet. The W218 is loosely based off the F800 concept car. Under the watchful eye of Mercedes-Benz chief designer Gordon Wagner, the final design was penned by creative director Hubert Lee. While we're on design, let's talk about those captivating premium LED headlights. Introduced in 2012, this marked the first time a full LED headlight suite was used on any car. As with most luxury cars these days, they are adaptive, meaning that the directional beam and aiming beams will change based on oncoming traffic and steering wheel inputs respectively. I was utterly disappointed to find that Mercedes-Benz had gone with some rather banal eyebrow designs starting in 2015, leaving the premium LED as standard equipment on the entry-level CLS 400 only. I'm not entirely sure about this last point, so if you guys know better, leave a comment below. This devolution of creativity, however, is what kept my search to model year 2014 and below. Indeed, coupled with the teething problems the M278 had in low serial numbers, this limited my search exclusively to the 2014 model year. It's a shame that Mercedes-Benz blinked on a magnificent design cue, and has effectively allowed Genesis to create an entire brand identity off the twin horizontal constellation headlight design Mercedes-Benz created. All right, well, a couple of notes before we really officially begin the drive review. You will immediately notice when you get into the CLS, especially if you're coming from an SUV, the driving position. It is exceptionally low. Actually a full 2 inches lower than the W218 that it's derived from. Additionally, it's 2.5 inches longer and 1 inch wider. All right, one thing that I have to do when I always get into this car, because you're not able to OBD program your preferences, is I have to go through what I call at work an after engine start flow. But that after engine start flow actually happens here in the car, because what Mercedes-Benz has done with their ECUs, their electronic control units, is they have a lot of the presets return to where they were before you got out of the car, turned off the engine, and came back. Perfect examples is turning off the automatic start-stop, turning back on the air conditioning recirc fan, turning the transmission and putting it back into sport mode, and then finally the bolsters in the seat that you can pre-program and inflate to your comfort. Those are all air bolsters. And so I guess what happens is Mercedes-Benz, in an attempt to extend the longevity of the air bolsters, if you're out of the car for more than 3 minutes, those air bolsters will partially deflate. So you wind up having to push your memory button again to reinflate the bolsters to where they were when you got out of the car. All right, let's talk a little bit about materials and build quality. Let's kick it off with, there's a channel on YouTube that I absolutely love, and it's called Build Quality Test. And apparently this guy works at a car dealership, and he gets into every car that they take in on a trade, and he literally sits in it and he films his finger as he goes around and he pushes on the different buttons and panels, and you listen for the crackles and creaks and wrinkles and crinkles. And he's done a build quality test on this very CLS, and his review was actually not so good. There were a lot of cracks and crinkles and squeaks and rattles when he applied pressure. That being said, having come out of the X6 and that thing just being a rattle box, when I drive this thing, it's actually very quiet. If you don't put pressure on any of the panels, it's actually a very quiet car. I like it. All right, let's talk materials. Inside the cockpit of the CLS 550, you have a wide variety of materials, everywhere from as low as MB Tex on some of the detailing to natural top grain leather. In addition to that, you have natural woods, and you have both brushed and polished aluminums. It's actually a lot of tactile and visual texture, which keeps the eye busy and not bored at all. It's a really nice car to sit in. All right, as you can see, I always do a little bit of tasteful modifications to my car. As you remember from my X6, I did put a deck lid spoiler on it. And then here on the CLS 550, I put an actual carbon fiber splitter from RW Carbon on the front lip. Now, a little word of advice, I've applied many body kits and spoilers to cars over the decades that I've been a car owner. However, this one, I would recommend just having a professional install it. I installed it myself with a half a roll of 3M double-sided automotive trim tape and 6 self-tapping screws, and still it wasn't enough. Once I got to Detroit, I actually had to run to a body shop to have it professionally installed. Stopping power from the CLS 550 is exceptional. You have 14-inch rotors in the front and 12.5-inch rotors in the back. I do have a bit of a gripe about these rotors. They are the contractor ATE from Continental GmbH in Germany, and the previous owner told me that he had to replace the rotors because of hotspot warping around 18 to 20,000 miles. Well, the same thing kind of happened on my X6, I thought, but then about 10,000 to 12,000 miles after I got the car, guess what? More hotspot warping. So when I do get my complete brake job done at about 56,000 miles, including pads and rotors, this will be the third set of rotors on this car before even one set of pads had been gone through. So when I do get my rotors changed, they are not going to be the crappy ATEs that are OEM factory issue on this car. I'm moving to a Brembo or a Zimmermann. I'm simply not putting up with ATA Continental. The Airmatic suspension has two different settings here. One is Sport and one is Comfort. I toggled it back and forth when I first got the car between Sport and Comfort, and I can barely feel the difference. My default is Sport mode. However, for my drive up to Michigan and back, I did have it set in Comfort, but again, I can barely notice the difference. So like before I said, the interior is very well designed with a lot of great materials, but one thing that the designers didn't seem to take into account is, as you can see from the light on my face, the particular angle of the top of this dashboard seems to always reflect either a late morning or afternoon sun right in your face. So I've considered possibly having a matte tape across the top of this dashboard to keep that light from coming in and striking me right in the eye. But then again, it also looks unsightly and godly, so I might actually just put up with it. All right, in order to counteract the blinding lights being reflected off the top of the dashboard, Mercedes-Benz has added a complement of other safety systems to this car. Park Assist, Distronic Cruise Control, meaning that it will actually slow down if you get too close to somebody while in cruise control, pre-safety emergency braking, and then also a blind spot alert. Those are the usuals and standards on what you'll find on most cars today, but in 2012, when this car first came out, they were actually cutting edge and revolutionary. Wait a minute. Back up. Is that a RENNtech badge? Indeed, it is a RENNtech badge, but this car is more than just badged with RENNtech. The RENNtech tune will be the topic of my next video. Some of the other gimmicks that the CLS 550 has is automatic bolster inflation. When you're really driving hard, they'll automatically inflate to keep you in position. I find that more of a distraction. In a real gimmick, I've shut it off. But the seat does have a massage setting, and I have used it 3 to 5 times when my lower back actually was kind of hurting, but you know, in the end, it's just a gimmick. It really doesn't help that much. One thing I do like is the electric rear window shade. Now, a lot of YouTubers complain that South Florida is boring driving. Straight roads, flat. Why would you want a performance-related sedan or coupe or a supercar down here anyway? But for those people that say that, I just assert that you haven't looked hard enough. I found a really nice curvy road in the southern Palm Beach County area, and we could talk a lot about performance, but how about instead of just talking about it at first, let's experience it. Okay, so already just with a little bit of a throttle dive, the car takes off. In 2012, when this powertrain was mated to the 7G Tronic, the acceleration was fast. But as time has gone by, you could probably say that that's been derated to quick. 0 to 60 times, depending upon what publication you looked at, range anywhere from 5 seconds flat to 4.6 seconds. So I've thrown this car into a number of corners, and this is where the coupe design of this car really takes effect. Yeah, you might get a little bit of tail kick early on when you first start your corner, or if you readjust your line through a high-speed corner, but eventually the physics and also the onboard technologies take over and actually stabilize the car very easily. So let's talk about the physics. We already mentioned that this car is 2 inches lower for a lower center of gravity than the E. In addition to that, you have nearly 50-50 weight distribution between the front of the car and the back of the car. And then finally, let's talk about the technologies. You have the stability control that will take over, and then also the airmatic suspension will start sending air to the side of the car that needs more pressure to firm up that outboard side of the turn. All right, as we covered earlier, the transmission has 3 different settings. You've got economy, sport, and manual. Economy is truly something for the geriatric. It's very slow to have any kind of throttle response within the first couple of centimeters of throttle motion. But if you put it into sport, the throttle mapping is completely different. The curve on the throttle mapping is much higher during the first couple of centimeters, and you're going to get a lot more throttle response and fuel injection, and thus, of course, performance response in sport mode. Now, you got the paddles. They might be small, but they still work really well. I've had no problem with these shift paddles, outside of the fact that in sport mode, it'll only hold the gear that you put it into in unaccelerated driving for maybe 10 seconds. Then once it realizes that you don't want it anymore, it shifts it back into whatever automatic gear it is that would be synchronized with what you're doing at that time and that speed. In addition to changing the throttle mapping, what sport mode will do, as it does in most automatic transmissions, is it's going to hold on to the acceleration gear a little bit longer. So if you let off the gas somewhere around 2,000 to 2,500 RPM, it'll stay there for maybe 5 seconds to make sure that you're done using that acceleration gear. So if you're clearly doing some sport-like driving with this car, you're clearly going to want to put it in manual mode. That way, regardless of how long you haven't used a particular gear that you're in, let's say third or fourth, it's not going to go back into sport mode, and it's going to stay in pretty much whatever gear you put it in. And what I mean by pretty much is that if you're in 7th gear on the freeway and you exit the freeway in manual mode, it'll gear down until you get to the stoplight at the end of that exit ramp. I'm going to deploy some YouTube magic here and quickly zip me over to a freeway entrance to demonstrate the only shortcoming I've been able to find with the 7G-tronic paddles. Remember how I said the transmission will hold you to the acceleration gear for several seconds after your acceleration is complete? Well, as shown here, even if I use the paddles, I have to tap the upshift paddles multiple times to get the transmission to gear up to 7th gear. Alright, selecting a gear for my freeway entrance launch here. I'm supposed to be the commander of the ship with the paddles, but still, it takes multiple reminders to get the transmission to do what I want it to do, gear up to 7. And let's see here. All right, there's 4th. Let's count how many commands are issued versus how many gears shift up. All right, I'm where I want to be. Now I'm tapping up. I want to be in 7th, and it's not letting me. See how slowly it went there? It took like 5 taps. But if that's the only shortcoming I can find, I'm very satisfied with a 7G-tronic. All right, let's talk about the OEM wheel and tire setup on the CLS 550. You've got 18-inch wheels all around. They're 8.5 in the front and 9.5 in the back. They are shod with OE, Continental, HR-rated, Conti Pro Contact tires. Now, I said I'd bring this up a little bit later in the video. Now's that time. I had reshod this car with 4 brand new Continental HR-rated Conti Pro Contacts, and I drove the car up to Detroit and back. It wasn't until I came back and maybe spent another 2,000 miles driving around town on a daily driver basis that I started to notice rumbling coming from the front end of my car at freeway speeds. I took it into my trusted tire dealer and they said that I was getting uneven tire wear at the front of the car and my alignment was still good. So, having preferred Michelin's with whatever car that I bought, I was always transitioning over to Michelin's, or they came with Michelin's, all the way back to my 1984 Mustang GT with the TRX Michelin on it. So I got rid of the tires in the front of the car and I'm transitioning over to ZR-rated Michelin Pilot Sport 4s. The ride since has been as smooth as glass. It's like Jay Leno said, Michelin is the only company that focuses on having a truly round tire. All right, as I turn around here and start heading home, let's talk about turning radius. This car is a little bit longer than the E, and it has an atrocious turning radius. If I do want to get turned around, I am pretty much always forced to scallop in to somebody else's right-of-way to get a full turnaround, and that often means crossing 2 lanes of traffic again. I wouldn't dare try to turn this car around at anything less than 3 full lanes. All right, let's talk a little bit about the market. So 18 months ago when I got this car with 36,000 miles on it, I was able to get it for $32,000. Today, you'll find a lot of low mileage CLS 550s selling for about $29,000 to $30,000. You can find CLS 550s in excellent shape, no damage or accident reports, any fires or floods like that. You can find one for probably $26,000 to $28,000. From a driving enthusiast perspective, I'd have to say that the only weakness that the CLS 550 may have is a lot of a floaty kind of disconnected feel. Yes, the power steering is over-assisted, and yes, the airmatic suspension kind of gives you a disconnected feel of the road. But that said, it's always gripping where you need it to grip, and it's letting you know through no chirping of the tires whatsoever through a hard turn that it's always stable. It's a very confident feel driving this car. Now, if you do want something that's a little bit more track focused, there is always the CLS 63S AMG. Now, it's true to say that the CLS 550 is sort of a personal luxury sport car, but at its heart is the coupe design and tuning that Mercedes-Benz had intended for an exciting car. And that it is.
I grew up, often as a passenger, in the fabled Mercedes-Benz W123. It took me a lot to finally come to terms with the fact that, well, German cars just aren't what they used to be. On the heels of such sobering awareness, I spent 6 months researching and another 18 experiencing what I've found, so far, to be one of the best cars to come out of Stuttgart or Munich in the last 20 years. The CLS range of cars possesses a variety of personalities, each one of them bristling with sophistication. The 550 is what I believe to be the perfect sweet spot of reliability, luxury, performance, and refined bravado. With the hindsight of over 4 decades within me, I must tragically agree. You can never step in the same river twice. Be that as it may, I think that Mark Twain put it best when he said, "History doesn't actually repeat itself, but it sure does rhyme."
Take 1. Across the big pond. Take 3. 6. And some of you may have seen in a very underwatched, forgive the golf carts here, I'm on a golf course. Take 13. Fucking New Yorkers? Fucking garbage. Take 16. Airline transport pilot, you're making a heck of a lot more money. Take 18. Low mileage CLS. Take 22. Absolute joy to drive.